Hello everyone. Today, and with today I mean the year 2014, we find the work of Sri Aurobindo and his co-worker, known as the Mother, has been translated into most of the major languages of the earth, and we find that their writings and teachings have touched the minds and the hearts of thousands and thousands of people around the globe and changed their lives in many cases. And yet we find that they have not yet received the attention they deserve in the Arabic world. So this video is one in a series of attempts to introduce them to the Arabic viewer or the Arabic reader. I am Zackaria Moursi, a retired engineering professor, and I have been translating Sri Aurobindo and the Mother into Arabic in the last 5 years. Sitting with me here in the library of the Sri Aurobindo Sadhana Peetham in Lodi, California, is my colleague Linda. Linda, please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Linda Lester, and I'm currently president of the Sri Aurobindo Association of America. And I welcome your translations, Zackaria, which are aimed at giving Arabic speakers a glimpse of the writings and the work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and their legacy of knowledge and transformation and hope. So could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
As I mentioned a while ago, I have been translating Sri Aurobindo and the Mother lately, and I have a website dedicated to these translations. The website is www.sriaurobindo-inarabic.com, and the interested viewer will find on this website 2 books that I have translated. They are both compiled from the writings and talks of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. One of the books has the title الشفاء المتكامل in Arabic, and the English original is Integral Healing, and as the name implies, this book deals with issues of health and illness and healing from a psychological and a spiritual point of view. The second book has the title مقتطفات من أعمال شري أوروبندو والأم باللغة العربية, the English selections from Sri Aurobindo and the Mother in Arabic. And this book has a wider scope. It has a chapter on education, for example, a chapter on human relationships, a long chapter on yoga, and a chapter, a kind of philosophical chapter on the concept of the divine. I just need to mention here that the selections that I have translated are by no means representative of the work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, which is quite huge and diversified. I have translated according to my limited means, and in the hope that to make a small beginning, and that in the future other Arabic speakers would then translate more and do a better job.
So Zackaria, why don't you tell us how you came to know about Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, and what motivated you to translate them?
Well, half a century ago, not quite, I was a graduate student in Germany, and I came across the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. The way actually this happened was rather interesting, and I have written a short story about it and gave it the title The Encounter. And indeed, this encounter turned out to be the turning point of my life. The viewer will find this short story on my website, and as a matter of fact I have another story there too, which then describes how over the decades the teachings and writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have changed me from the person I was then, who was like outwardly relatively successful and everything was okay, but inwardly I had a lot of problems, fears and doubts, and how over the decades I then could find the way to peace and harmony and a kind of serenity.
So, Zackaria, how, in your opinion, could the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother be of help to the Arabic world, which is currently facing tremendous challenges and problems?
So, well, Linda, this is, of course, the big question, and I will try to answer it in two stages. In the first stage, I would like to talk about the relevance of the work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother in general, and then later on I will say a few things that are specific to the Arabic world in my view. So, we find today many seekers around the world turning more and more towards spirituality. And with spirituality here, I don't mean like any dramatic conversions or anything like that. I just mean the basic aspiration and search of every human being for a lasting happiness that is not easily destroyed, for security, for knowledge, for justice, for divine love, and so forth. So, now these seekers then soon find that really to attain or to achieve in spirituality there need to be a radical change in consciousness and at least some change in the human nature too. And of course this has been achieved over the ages by people like the mystics and the Sufis and the saints, etc. But even they had to pay a high price for it. Mostly they had to abandon their normal life, live in solitude, sometimes in poverty, sometimes meet opposition from other people, and then do long fastings and meditations and prayers and so forth. Now, the good news that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother bring us is that we no longer have to do this. One can achieve spiritually while remaining in life itself. Only, of course, one has to know how to do it. One needs a great teacher who has tried everything and can guide us. And that's where I see that great teachers like Sri Aurobindo and the Mother come in. Regarding the Arabic-speaking world, here is actually what I would like to say. First, I would like to say that I do not feel myself qualified to talk about the Arabic world as a whole. I have been born in an Egyptian Muslim background, and I have lived 30 years in Egypt, so I can just, from my limited experience, I can say this mostly as a human being and not specifically as anything else. What I think is quite missing in the Arabic world is the issue of unity and oneness. One cannot achieve peace with just political treaties. One has to establish some kind of peace in oneself first, and then on that basis one can grow in knowledge and in inner power, and then extend this slowly to one's surroundings and neighbors, etc. And here again, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother can teach us a lot about this as we are actually going towards the end of this video. We are going to take this topic one more time and talk about it.
So after these introductory remarks, maybe we could talk a little bit about Sri Aurobindo and the mother themselves. So, Zackaria, could you give us a brief biography of Sri Aurobindo?
Sri Aurobindo was a multifaceted genius. He was many things one after the other, and sometimes many things at the same time. We hear of him as a national leader, as a great poet, as a prolific writer, and mostly actually as a great renewer of spirituality, and ultimately as a visionary of evolution. He was born in Calcutta, India in 1872. His father was Anglophile, so he sent him at the age of 7 to England with strict instructions that he should be given a Western education and should not know anything about his Indian origin. And Sri Aurobindo stayed then in England for 14 years and studied at the University of Cambridge, and he has actually to a certain degree fulfilled the wishes of his father. We hear that in Cambridge, for example, he won all the awards of Greek and Latin poetry, and yet during this time too he joined other Indian students, and they swore that they're going to work for freeing India. And at that time he felt already that he would have a great role to play in that direction. This Western education that Sri Aurobindo has received actually has been one of the hallmarks of his character. We see that he could have a global view of the human situation, unhampered by any ethnic or religious narrow sentiments, so much so that the Nobel Prize laureate, the French writer Romain Rolland, said about him, he is hitherto the most perfect synthesis between the genius of Europe and the genius of Asia. He then went back to India at the age of 21, took a few years where he read a lot about the languages of his country and the traditions, and was professor and so forth, but soon jumped actually into the political arena and became one of the most revolutionary leaders. He was known to be the first one who has demanded complete freedom of India from British rule. He then ultimately, due to his political activities, was put into jail for about 1 year, and in this 1 year he had major spiritual experiences, so that after his release actually he continued his political action for a short time. But when he found out that the British are planning on recapturing him, he decided then to quit British India for good and took refuge in a French enclave in the city of Pondicherry on the ocean on the east-south coast of India, where he then spent the 40 last years of his life. He lived in an increasing actually seclusion. At first he was surrounded by a few fellow freedom fighters and disciples, but then when his co-worker, the mother, arrived finally, he went into almost complete seclusion that remained until the end. During World War I he wrote his major books that we have today, and after that he maintained very extensive correspondence with many people around the world, and of course with his disciples. And maybe it would be a good point, Linda, that you give us now a short biography of the mother.
Yes, the mother was born in Paris in 1878 to an Egyptian mother and a Turkish father, and she was already an accomplished artist and pianist and occultist by the time she met Sri Aurobindo when she was 36. And on her second visit to India when she was 42, she decided she would stay there and continue to work with him. And there she remained for the rest of her life, continuing Sri Aurobindo's work actually for 23 years after he passed away in 1950. Now together, Sri Aurobindo and the mother were a unique convergence of two supreme spiritual figures united in a single vision. And a vision, incidentally, that each had had independently without knowing anything about the other person. And they complemented each other perfectly. So Sri Aurobindo, of course, was the writer, the thinker, and the visionary, working behind the scenes through the written word and silent spiritual power. While the mother, on the other hand, was very dynamic and working in the front to translate their vision into concrete reality. And at the age of 90, she founded an international city in India called Auroville. And that city today is very much alive and still growing and will soon be celebrating its 50th anniversary.
I think now it might be a good time to stop here, and when we meet again, we can talk now about the work and legacy of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Well, hello again. This time we are sitting in the so-called Sri Aurobindo Symbol Garden in the same community as before, and we have just moved from the library to the garden outside. And we would like now to talk a little bit about the heritage and the work of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. And just to mention again, it is actually a great heritage and a great work, and we will be only able to touch upon a few salient points of it. The first thing that comes to my mind is that body of knowledge that is now known under the title Integral Yoga. And here Sri Aurobindo and the mother, who have been great knowers of the different levels of consciousness and how they relate to the different parts of being, have left us with some instructions how to rise in our consciousness, and they did this in a vast correspondence with their disciples. And as you may know, the yoga is a vast field, but for Sri Aurobindo it had a specific meaning. We can see that from two phrases that he has coined. One of them is that all life is yoga, which means that for him yoga was not something that one does on the side, but it is an attitude that one takes all the time towards all things. And the other phrase that he said was that yoga is nothing but practical psychology. So for him, the emphasis was not on the physical yoga with breathing exercises and posture and all of that, but on the inner work. In this video, we will not go deeply, we don't have the time to go deeply into the integral yoga, but the viewers will find everything they need to know on the web, or particularly also on the website of the main Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry. One can't actually mention the work of Sri Aurobindo and the mother without referring to two great ideas or concepts that are like the hallmark of his work and philosophy. One of them is that man is a transitional being, and the other one is the concept of the supermind. So Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about these two great ideas?
Right. So man as a transitional being simply means that humanity is not the last step in evolution. And evolution, there's no reason to assume that evolution will stop at the human species as we know it. Sri Aurobindo saw evolution not merely as a biological process by which nature evolves more and more complex material organisms, but above all as a gradual unveiling of a divine consciousness in matter. And he didn't see the future being as just an improved version of what we are today. For instance, having more technical knowledge or being capable of space travel and so forth, but rather being endowed with a truth consciousness that he called the supermind. And this truth consciousness is a consciousness of light and beauty and bliss and spontaneous right action. And Sri Aurobindo saw that if a sufficient number of people attain this consciousness, the problems and dangers threatening our world will cease to exist, and life will become actually divine. And he called his major philosophical work The Life Divine.
At this point, I assume the new viewer or listener might think, oh yes, but all this sounds very utopian, like wishful thinking, and how would it be possible that our Earth, with all the difficulties that we hear about, will be able to make such a big transition? So the key actually to understand Sri Aurobindo is not to forget that he was a visionary of evolution, and he was mainly concerned with the next step in evolution and how human beings are going to evolve. Of course, he knew quite well that evolution doesn't happen overnight and that it will take time, but the important point here is that this time it will not need millions of years to go to a next step, because humanity has reached such a level of consciousness that it can consciously collaborate with nature in its own evolution.
Zackaria, you mentioned earlier that unity and oneness are very much needed in the Arabic world today. Could you tell us how Sri Aurobindo and the Mother approached this issue?
The issue of unity and oneness has always played a prominent role in the thought and teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And it is actually a unity that is based on the idea that the divine is everywhere, so it is practically a unity in the divine. We see that this has happened in their thought on several levels. For example, first on the individual level, they have always taught that the seeker, one of the first needs he needs to do is to achieve oneness in his self first, because nothing actually can be done if one part of our being wants to achieve something and other parts want other things. In any direction, nothing will be able to be done. Next, we see that they looked at it from the collective point of view, and already Sri Aurobindo has written during World War I a book, The Ideal of Human Unity, in which he called for unity of all humankind. Several decades later, we see the mother has translated that into practice when she launched the city of Auroville, which Linda mentioned already. And in the charter of that city, she has stated that Auroville belongs to no country in particular, to no one in particular, but to all human beings at the same time. Then there was one more level actually, which Linda will tell us more about, when Mother started in her last years to work on unity and oneness in a yoga that she called the yoga of the cells.
So I could add that the mother in her later years took her yoga even further. She was experiencing not just unity, but oneness, which is to say, identity with others. And she said she was increasingly losing the sense of being a separate entity, so much so that when she spoke, she felt even a kind of awkwardness or embarrassment when she had to use the personal pronoun I. She'd say, "Where is this I no longer know," because it was everywhere. It was in everyone. And in fact, she experienced such a oneness with others around her that even in her physical consciousness, she felt their illnesses as if they were in her own body. And by working on the symptoms in herself, she could alleviate and often heal these illnesses in others.
I am glad, Linda, you brought this point up. I have here a remarkable quote from the mother, from her actually last years, where she says, "My body has completely lost the sense of its personality. And it's strange. For instance, I don't know how many times a day I will suddenly become aware of a disorder, a pain or suffering somewhere, not in my own body, but as it were in a spot in an immense body. And after a while or a few hours later, I'll be told that someone or other had had exactly the same symptoms, and I felt them coming from that immense body." So this is then, of course, the ultimate oneness and unity, when we start being united with others, not just in our thoughts and feelings, but also on the physical, material level.
So the time for our interview is coming to an end. So Zackaria, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
So I would like to say something very simple and yet true. There is a lot of suffering going on in the Arabic world today, and anybody who is involved in some way with spirituality knows that much of this suffering is actually unnecessary. So one just needs to look into oneself and take a moment from all the turmoil that's going outside and start thinking coolly and deliberately about how to remove the causes of the suffering. And finally, I would like to wish the viewers happiness and fulfillment on any path they are following, or they choose to follow. The name of the path itself doesn't matter. If we all follow our paths with sincerity and we put our hearts to it, we will all be contributing to bring, in the long run maybe, on this earth, the life divine Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have envisioned and are promising us it will materialize on this earth.